Welcome back. This time we're talking about Legion, Season 1, Episode 5, Chapter 5. And man, at the beginning of my review of Chapter 4, I said, what an episode, but I had no idea what we had coming this episode. Not only do we get some solid action, some definite developments in the story, but some actual answers to our big questions about what's going on in David's head. As always, we can never be entirely sure what we're seeing is what's actually happening, but this was an episode that really felt like it delivered some solid answers. At least the beginning of understanding of what exactly the devil with the yellow eyes and Lenny and everything else that's been happening in David's head. So let's dive right into this one. Basically, it picks up very shortly after the end of the previous episode, which ended on a cliffhanger with Carrie being shot after David returns from the astral plane to rescue everyone from the Division 3 agents, including Afro Man. And I'm sure he has a name, I just like calling him Afro Man, so that's just what I'm going to call him for right now. But it's very obvious early on in this episode that the David that returns from the astral plane is not the exact David that left. He's much more confident. I mean, borderline cocky. Actually, not even borderline. He's very cocky in this episode. Seems to know what he wants and goes after it with no questions asked. Which is basically the opposite of the very confused and very passive David that we've known for the first 4 episodes. So it's pretty clear something's off, and we actually got a clue for this at the end of the previous episode, in that final moment where we get to see the hand come up behind David's shoulder, and then we see that it's Lenny, who also in the last episode we learned doesn't exist. David's friend from his past was a guy named Benny, not a woman named Lenny. But this new confident David, who first creates a version of the astral plane so he and Sid can have some fun together and actually touch each other, then sets off to find his sister and take on the Division 3 solo, which precipitates the rest of the team gathering to go what they think is going to be a rescue mission to save him. Of course, that's not the case because they arrive at the Division 3 location and everyone's dead. Very, very dead. Very, very dead. And David's gone. He's already rescued his sister. But this is when we start getting some answers to what is going on in David's head. Now, obviously, one of the main questions about David is he actually insane? First, he's in a psych ward. He's insane. But no, he's not insane. He's actually just a very strong telepath. But then as we learn more about David, it's not outside the realm of possibility that he may just be a very powerful telepath who happens to be insane. And that seems to possibly be the case when we see how crazy he's acting on the security footage. He's enjoying killing people. This is definitely a sort of split personality type of situation. But then they actually see like a physical manifestation of the devil with the yellow eyes on the infrared camera. And this seems to be confirmed when Carrie is going over the footage of David's session in the MRI, when he sees him flash to the devil with the yellow eyes and then flash to young David. And he comes to a different conclusion, that like what Oliver said in the previous episode, this monster, as he put it, isn't actually a parasite and is actually a separate consciousness that invaded David's mind at an early age when he was a child. And then later when we get to see David interacting with his sister, we learn the truth that the dog, the angriest boy, the devil with yellow eyes, and Lenny are all separate manifestations of the same being. They're all one and the same, but they're not David. At least that's what it appears at this point, that it is actually a separate consciousness. As Carrie puts it, it's an older consciousness, a mutant that was so powerful that he left his physical body behind. Of course, that's just a theory at this point, and half of the theories that have been espoused so far have been proven untrue. But that's a good sign for David, because that would mean that he's not actually insane. Not that it matters much for everyone else when this other being or this separate portion of David's psyche has control of his powers. Well, the action of the episode culminates when our team, which includes Dr. Bird, Sid, autonomy. The telekinetic who we first saw in the first episode when they were rescuing David from the division agents. As far as I know, he doesn't have a name. I don't remember them giving him one. They may have mentioned it in the first episode and I've forgotten, but I don't think they have. But anyway, that's their team, and they're all being followed by Afro Guy, who apparently survived the assault on the division's HQ. Late in the episode, we see Afro Guy taking on the form of the telekinetic, and that is apparently is his power, that he can make other people think he's someone else. Although it's not entirely clear if he actually physically changes form or if it's some kind of mental power that makes people see what he wants them to see. But either way, in the final confrontation, the telekinetic who shows up and fires at David, and Sid puts herself in the line of the fire and tells David to go back to the White Room, which is where they were having fun together earlier in the episode, and they do, and we get to see David himself, and he's talking about how he can't control her. But before they can talk for very long, the devil with the yellow eyes shows up and starts going after Sid, trapping her on the bed, and David kind of just loses control and goes crazy, which is, probably the wrong word to use in this show. And then we get this scene where all of the characters, including the telekinetic, if I'm not mistaken, are all back at the psych ward, and they're taking part in a group therapy session, and the doctor is Lenny. And she's talking to Sid, and Sid says, "Let's talk," and boom, credits, like this show has done pretty much in every episode so far. When you least expect it, the credits hit and you have to wait another week. This is just such a well-made series, from the acting to the storytelling to the camera work to everything in the production. In this episode, the showcase was the sound. When they start trying to infiltrate David's childhood home, they all go deaf, and the show goes completely silent for a while. We get some minor music cues, and then we get some kind of jump scare music hits, but these were actually scary like jump scares are supposed to be. And it's not until Sid finds David and confronts Lenny that the sound starts coming back, and it starts back really tinny. It was just another great job by some of the technical people behind this show. Now, obviously, most of this episode was focused on David and the fact that whatever is in him, whether it's part of him or this parasite, has essentially taken over. And I think I've covered that pretty well. But there were some other things that came up in this episode. When Dr. Bird is talking about her husband Oliver, and you can tell the need that she has to try to get Oliver back, but she talks about what actually happened to him, that he had been spending more and more time in these fake worlds, and one day he just never woke up. And you can kind of see a little bit of that with David creating the White Room so he can spend time with Sid, and you can see that she's already somewhat addicted to it, and when you can't touch anyone and you can finally do it in a very intimate manner, I can see why that would be enticing to her. But the timing of it right after Dr. Bird's warning was somewhat ominous. We also got to see a bit more of Carrie's powers and how damage to one of them can affect the other. Dr. Bird asks him early on in the episode whether he could just absorb her back to save her from her wounds, and he talks about how he would take on that damage and he would go into shock. Later, he actually does absorb her, and we get to see him take on the bruising that was on her face. And when she leaves him later in the episode, he still has the bruising, but she's healed. We also learned that David was adopted. That was the big secret that she'd been keeping from him. And now that I mention her name, I don't think I saw her in the psych ward scene at the end. So I don't know what that means. And speaking of the ending, I do want to mention the last time we were technically in the real world, if you can consider anything in the vicinity of David the real world, we saw the bullets heading towards Sid. So it's been shown that when David goes into a mental state and then leaves it, he doesn't have to go right back physically to the same place in the world. But I am a little nervous about what's going to happen when they leave this psych ward made up world and go back to the real world, that whether or not Sid is going to still be in danger. And I honestly at this point don't know if it's going to mean anything or not, but it's sort of a minor thing I did want to mention, and that was Dr. Kissinger when Sid comes across her and she refuses to let him out. I really wasn't sure if he was actually Dr. Kissinger or if he was the Afro Man, and I still don't know for sure which one he was, because he seemed overly angry at Sid, even considering the fact that she wasn't rescuing him. And I think that's it. For as weird as it was much more focused than a lot of these episodes. What did you think of this episode? What did you think of the revelations of David possibly having this parasite, or either way, the idea that the dog and the angry boy and the devil with the yellow eyes and Lenny are actually all one and the same, which was always definitely one of the possibilities, but in this show you'd never be sure until we're shown, and even then you got about a 50-50 shot of it actually being what they're showing you. As always, you can subscribe to my channel, check out some other TV and movie reviews, and until next time, let's talk.